Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. My name is Bob Clark, and I'm the Deputy Director here at the Franklin D. Roosevelt Presidential Library and Museum. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 11th Annual Roosevelt Reading Festival. When FDR established the first presidential library here at his home in Hyde Park, he envisioned it becoming the premier research center for the study of the Roosevelt era. We're consistently one of the busiest research rooms in the entire presidential library system. And one of the reasons why we love this day so much is that we get to see the fruit of the labors of all of the people who use our research room throughout the year. So it's our pleasure to have you here. Let me quickly go over the format of the day as well as a couple of housekeeping matters. The first thing is, would everyone please take out your electronic devices and turn them off, so that our presentation isn't interrupted today. Thank you. Second housekeeping matter is, if you will find somebody on the staff here today, they will be happy to give you one of these Roosevelt Library buttons, and that will get you into free admission to the new permanent exhibits that we opened just a year ago after our 3.5-year renovation. So I encourage you all to check out the new exhibits. And finally, I want to thank our friends from C-SPAN who are filming here today. They're always great at showing their support for our public programs here at the Roosevelt Library, so I appreciate them being here again today. So the format of the session is that our distinguished guest will speak for about 30 minutes, after which there will be an opportunity for questions and answers. Because C-SPAN is filming in this room, what I'd like you to do is to come up and line up at the microphone here so that they can not only capture your question on tape, but also your smiling face to see how much you're enjoying yourself. And then after the question and answer period, I will whisk the guest out to the lobby where he will be happy to sign all of the books that you are going to buy at the New Deal Museum store. So David Cross is a freelance writer and trial attorney and lives in Philadelphia. His trial manual, How Not to Think Like a Lawyer, was a bestseller on Amazon in 2013. His earlier book, Cross Examines, is a collection of his published essays on literature, history, music, and travel. His new book, Chasing History, One Man's Road Trip Through the Presidential Libraries, came about from a desire to flee the criminal courtroom of Philadelphia in order to get to know the presidents a little bit better. When not writing or litigating, David spends the bulk of his time quoting Bob Dylan and trying to decide which 3 Ds he would take to a desert island, and under his rules, no box sets are allowed. David is married to his lovely wife, Nicole, and is the loving father of David, Michaela, Kona, Chip, and Buddy. So ladies and gentlemen, our good friend David Cross.
Good morning, everybody. Well, it is a delight and an honor for me to be here at the Franklin Roosevelt Library to discuss my book. When I decided to take a road trip across the country to visit all of the presidential libraries, I really had no idea what it was I was going to find. And I had no specific point of view at that time. I had heard some of the academic criticisms that these are all giant mausoleums to ego, that they don't confront us enough with both sides of the presidents. And the most damning of all criticisms that academics have levied, that they're like theme parks, that young people might actually come to some of these places for fun. And so when I came, I didn't know what I was going to find. And the first library I visited happened to be the Franklin Roosevelt Library, and that was just pure serendipity. I live in Philadelphia, so it was the nearest one. And I came out to this library, and I fell in love with this place. And as I traveled across the country, I can't say that none of these criticisms are ever worthwhile, but I found so much that was positive about the libraries, and I think Franklin Roosevelt did a lot of things, but this is one of the big ones. And I think everybody interested in American history and everybody interested in the presidents needs to thank Franklin Roosevelt for coming up with this idea of the presidential library, because we didn't have this idea before, and there's really nothing like this in other countries. And I just thought, when I started my trip, well, who would be opposed to this? Who would be opposed to having a presidential library? And when Roosevelt was president, most of the presidents used to put their documents into the Library of Congress. But documents went all over the place. And we all know that Lincoln's documents went all over the place. Some presidents had a bonfire, and many of the papers were eaten by rats. George Washington was the first person to have the idea of the presidential library. He was meticulous about protecting his paperwork. But he did not have the chutzpah to say, let's create a presidential library for me. That took Franklin Roosevelt. And Franklin Roosevelt came up with that idea, and we all talk about how we're in the most partisan of times, but if you read through the arguments that went on about whether or not to allow for this library that's right here, whether or not to allow it to take place, you'd realize that there's been partisanship throughout our history, of course. A lot of people thought it was a bad idea, and the man who thought it was the worst idea of all was Hamilton Fish, who's from this district. And he, if Roosevelt said it was sunny, he said it was dark. So we know some Hamilton Fishes out there. This is not a new thing. And he said, this is a terrible idea. First of all, it's this giant monument to this man's ego. And more importantly, we got the Library of Congress. Why don't we put him there? And what he said was, we're going to have to drive from Squadunk to Podunk to go, because if Roosevelt has one, everyone's going to want one of these libraries. And so I thought, that's a great title, Driving from Squadunk to Podunk. My publisher didn't think so. Said any title that requires 5 minutes to explain is not a good title. So I didn't call it that. But when you come to the Roosevelt Library and when you come to a lot of other libraries, you see this wonderful thing, which is that when you go to where Roosevelt was, when you see the Hudson River that he used to actually look at, when you're in the house that he lived at, you get closer to him. And it's one thing to read about a president, and it's another thing to be where he is. And if you're a writer, this is a wonderful opportunity. It's a wonderful opportunity. And let me get started. I've got a PowerPoint presentation here. So this, of course, is the Roosevelt Library. Now, this is actually a different room from where the research takes place now in the Roosevelt Library. But this is what you would find if you went to the back room and saw where the researchers were doing their work. And as you see the gentleman back there with his camera, that's how most of us get our information now. We bring in a digital camera, and I'm old enough to remember back in the time when you used to have to come in and you asked a request and they had to Xerox. So now you can just come in and you get to snap the pictures. And I came into that room and I was interested in finding out, I want to know how the presidential libraries came about. I want to know how Franklin Roosevelt did this. So the gentleman who introduced me, Bob Clark, wheeled me up one of these carts, which you can see. And I opened up the first box and I took out one file. And what's wonderful about this library is it's before the Freedom of Information Act took place, and the archivists and even the White House, before Franklin Roosevelt left the White House, were able to organize the papers very well. And I looked at this first file, and I saw about 20 pages cross-referenced. So in other words, it might be something that a cabinet member said, and then it's cross-referenced to those papers. And I saw that, and I thought, my God, if I'm a writer, and I footnote this, it looks like I've done this for 6 months. So for all of these books we read, and this is why my book, Chasing History, this is why I dedicate it to the archivists, because you don't see their names. They might not even be alive anymore when you go up to that file. But for the McCulloughs and the Doris Kearns Goodwins, they couldn't do what they do without their work. And why do they do it?